Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I am fine. Thank you so much for asking. Today is Thursday, the 16th of September, 2021. And I want to begin by thanking you for saying yes to the A. Grace Lee Mims Arts and Culture Oral History Project. Since you've had a chance to look at the list of proposed questions and you're comfortable with those things that I'd like to speak about this afternoon, we'll go ahead and get started. So, would you begin, please, by stating your name and your affiliations?
Sure. My name is Marquise Lindsey-Bradley, and I'm currently halfway through my undergraduate degree at the Cleveland Institute of Music, where I study clarinet performance. And I'm also doing some coursework at Case Western with a minor in business management.
Okay. And Marquise, may I ask, are you affiliated with any other groups outside of the Cleveland Institute of Music and Case Western Reserve University?
Yes, I am, and I'll get all into that when I kind of debunk more about my history.
Oh,
But
okay. Well, I'll keep working my way through this list then. And if there's anything else that you'd like to add, feel free to do so. But I would like to ask you about your early life. Can you tell us about your family, your parents' names, if you'd like to mention them on the record, and when and where you were born, where you grew up, and the schools that you attended before you enrolled at the Cleveland Institute of Music?
Sure. So I'm originally from Philadelphia, right in the city. I was born in Temple University Hospital, uh, early in the morning, if that matters for the sun rising sign or something like that. But uh, my mom is Aisha Lindsay, and my dad is Steve Bradley. They separated very soon after my birth, so I didn't really grow up with my dad in my life. But my mom did do, I think, a wonderful job at raising my sister and I to become great people. Kind of more of a praise to her, but less to me. But moreover, around the time, maybe let's fast forward. I was born in 2001. We're going to skip ahead a bit to when I actually can remember things. So when I was about in first grade, I moved to the house where I pretty much grew up in the neighborhood in which I grew up, and that was in Alany in Philadelphia. So researchers have said that that's one of the most linguistically diverse neighborhoods in the city of Philadelphia. So I grew up in a very diverse community, having neighbors who were black, white, Cambodian, Jewish, and the whole mixing pot. So just from a very young age, I was always exposed to what other people were doing and the differences between people, and that was just normal. Uh, and with that, going to school in my neighborhood, I went to Grover Washington Junior Middle School. So if anyone's familiar with the saxophonist, kind of the father of smooth jazz, Grover Washington Jr. Uh, had a school and, well, honored in his name. And I went to that school, and that's kind of where I first got my hot takes on the world. I was able to start developing opinions and learning from people on a deeper level and connecting with them. Uh, so the connections, or really the friendships that I had during that time, of course, at that young age, were extremely impactful for me.
Well, thank you. I think we're off to a wonderful start. Now, are you comfortable with me calling you Marquise, or would you like me to use your family name?
Marquise is great.
Okay, and you can call me Regina if you choose to do so. But Philadelphia, the history textbooks say we used to refer to that, and perhaps we're still doing that, as referring to it as the city of brotherly love. Do you think that's still applicable for your hometown?
You know, of course, in many ways, uh, but definitely Philadelphia, and I don't know, it seems a little dark right now, as I'm sure none of us are oblivious to the fact of things like gun violence, poverty, and the, all of those systems that are kind of in place that are making it not the case. But I think really Philadelphia has something, has an energy and when you get there, it may hurt a little bit at first. You know, no one is. It's not as nice as Cleveland. Not many people will hold the door for you, but there's a sense of genuineness from the people you meet, no matter who they are, and around that city, I think it definitely shows. And there's a stark contrast for me as I started traveling to different places and noticing that even if everyone around me is different, when I go to a different place, everyone's going to be different in a different way. Uh, so Philadelphia, growing up there with that tough love, I think is how I would describe it, and within the brotherly love. Uh, but that's definitely, it's still there in its core.
All right, thank you. Very historic city. You know, at least the way I teach those survey courses in American history, that a lot of great things came out of Philadelphia and Pennsylvania in general. So thank you for confirming some of what I've been reading and sharing as a result of the textbooks that I used in class. But I would also like to talk about your migration, if you will, to Cleveland, Ohio. Um, I know I've heard things about the Institute, but can you tell me why you selected the Cleveland Institute of Music for your post-secondary studies?
Sure. Uh, I think in order to talk about that, I have to go back just a little bit and maybe something I glossed over before. But my high school experience was where I really started to focus my energy into music. So I went to an arts high school, the premier arts school in Philadelphia, the Creative and Performing Arts School. So people like The Roots, Christian McBride, and a bunch of other familiar names that I'm sure people who know out here have gone to that school. And with that track record, I decided to focus my energy into getting into that school and seeing what opportunities would come out of there. Uh, and the teachers that I had there at Kappa were, and mentors that I had just throughout high school were extremely helpful in educating me on the fact of conservatories and music school and what that means and what a career in music could look like. Uh, and when my mind was open to that realm in that industry, uh, that's when I kind of started exploring a bunch of schools. And by the time my senior year came, I had a set list of primarily just classical music conservatories where I would plan to do what I'm doing now, pretty much. Uh, and Cleveland actually found its way on the list rather late. I had found out about CIM when I was actually in Detroit for a conference, the Sphinx Conference that they hold annually. And I had met President Hogel, who's the president and CEO of CIM now, and we had just talked for a second, and he's like, "Oh, like, are you a senior? Are you doing auditions?" And I said yes, and I like list my name of conservatories that were similar to CIM but not CIM, and the reaction was, "Well, why don't you audition at CIM?" Uh, so just with some talking, going through the admissions process there, I was able to find my teacher, who I just am amazed by and continually am grateful for him. But by way of that conference, meeting President Hochul and then connecting with my current teacher, I had found CIM, went through the application audition process. And when I came here for my audition, that's kind of when I was sold. So before I even got a result, uh, I walked around. Of course, this is very late in my college application process, so I had visited all of the other schools I was applying to. Uh, and I think that weekend I was also revisiting Oberlin. And not only was it the experience that I had while at CIM that really that drew me closer in, it was the contrast between my experience at Oberlin and CIM on the plane ride home that helped me solidify that decision in my head. But I do love it here, and I don't think I would have had as great of an experience anywhere else.
Well, may I go back a little bit to
Sure.
this conference that you mentioned? I think most of the Ohioans who listen to your interview will recognize the Institute. You may not even have to say the Cleveland Institute of Music. Just say that you're a musician and say the Institute, they'll probably know. And I'm guessing they'll also know a little bit about the Oberlin College Conservatory. But this Sphinx Conference, what is that about? And how is it that you were attending conferences before you even graduated high school? What brought you to that point?
Oh my. All right. So the Sphinx Conference is pretty much a collective of Black and Latino artists, and they come together to uh, pretty much solve the issues of DEI in the classical music community at the national scale and even international. So there's involved in this conference throughout the weekend. There is also a competition where string players who compete in a junior and senior division uh, go neck to neck for a lot of money to help them with their careers and all that fun stuff. Uh, and also this conference where leaders from different orchestras, conservatories, really just any institution in the industry will come to learn to educate each other and to connect as you would with a conference. And while I was in high school, I was involved in uh, a few different programs that were very new, that were just kind of surfacing around the country called musical pathway programs. And I belonged to the one in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Music Alliance for Youth. And they were having a panel discussion speaking on the effectiveness of pathway programs, how to start them in your own city, and just giving pathway program managers a perspective from a student, a manager of that program, and also an administrator within that program. And I was invited to be a student speaker on that panel, and it's been a great time. I was also invited the following year to speak on another student panel. But the Sphinx Conference, in less words, is really like a cookout for Black and Latino musicians.
And you're smiling, so I'm assuming you like cookouts.
Yes.
And thank you for giving us a detailed description of what it is that the conference does for the young artists who are fortunate enough to be accepted, on the panels, in the pathway programs, and in the other activities that you described. I wanted to ask the question because I had heard of the Sphinx Conference before. In fact, we like to say here in Cleveland, I don't know if you've heard this yet, but that the Cleveland Orchestra is the best band in the land. And usually, you've heard it, perhaps?
No, I have not.
Oh, first time for everything. I heard it and I repeat it all the time.
All
But
right.
in a beautiful place to be in the world, in my opinion, but I'm biased. But one of the things we also did before this season of COVID closed a lot of concert halls down was on the Martin Luther King Jr. holiday weekend. We would have a community concert. And very often, young performers, the winners of those competitions from the Sphinx Conference would come in and they were just incredible. But I wanted to hear from someone who had actually been through that whole process of being identified, and people recruiting you, what it was like to be involved in that. So thank you for sharing that, although it was not something I had planned to ask about on my list of questions here. But with your education here in the city of Cleveland at the Cleveland Institute of Music, can you tell me a little bit about the role of pathway programs here on America's North Coast? Is it similar to what you experienced as a high school student? And if so, how or what are the similarities?
Mhm. So CIM has their musical pathway fellowship, and I'm actually working with them as an assistant to the manager of that program and also the community engagement coordinator. So things like recruitment for people to get into those programs from who aren't already. So I've been working very closely with this pathway program, and it's a little bit different from the one in Philly, primarily just in the size. The PMA program in Philadelphia, PE Philadelphia, we got that. They have over 100 students, and the goal was just to fund as many students with the potential to have a career in music to make that an option for them. And here in Cleveland, it's a different funder. So PMA is funded by the Mellon Foundation, and Cleveland is funded by various other institutions and obviously themselves. So the program is smaller, though they're looking to expand. But with that smaller community here, I've noticed that the students within the program in Cleveland are much more friendly with each other uh, compared to in Philly when I was there. Uh, my friends and I were friends, and then everyone else kind of just did their own thing, and uh, kind of we all knew about each other though because it's music, it's a small world, everyone's on Instagram and Facebook, so we all know about each other, but we're still not quite at that level where everyone can speak to each other comfortably and have that greater sense of community. But in Cleveland, I think that they have achieved that.
Mhm. Okay, so in this capacity then, as did you say an assistant to the coordinator and
Uh,
director,
to the manager of the Pathway program.
the manager? Okay. Is that the equivalent of a graduate assistant or student assistant? What kinds of things do you do to support the program and identify other gifted students?
Sure. So this is currently my work study position, and this was something I was able to work with the program director to establish. So kind of combining the roles and our goals as a BSU, so the Black Student Union, of which I'm a board member at CIM. We had goals to continue a mentorship program with the Music Pathway Fellows. Uh, and we saw this as an opportunity when I was originally just going to be working in the office as an assistant, doing more of the clerical work. We saw an opportunity to have a more impactful role. So we took that opportunity and developed more of the community engagement aspect. Uh, so my work this semester will be focused on working with primarily the seniors and helping them first just establish good self-organization habits, things like preparing for college prep audition, well, the college application process, college auditions, and general music goal setting, and then also preparing them to enter different communities, being able to do things like public speaking, presentation skills, playing in front of people, and really just articulating their experience so that other people can maybe find a similar path. Uh, so that's what my role is going to be this semester moving forward.
Now, you mentioned the Black Student Union at the Cleveland Institute of Music. And because I work in University Circle at the Western Reserve Historical Society, I've seen all your banners, that CIM is at least 100 years old. And you have this rich history of producing great musicians. But how long has there been a Black Student Union? And why do you think that's a necessary organization for an institution like CIM to have?
Yeah. So we've been around maybe, oh my, I should know the answer to this. It was established 1 year before I got here, and I'm a junior. So 4 years. All right. So it's still a very new student organization. But like you mentioned, to answer your question, I do believe it's a very necessary component of the organizational body, uh, especially because CIM, who's pretty much have always had very successful musicians of color coming in and out of the school, as we've kind of seen through meeting with our alumni who date even back further than the 70s, the 60s. We were here. Uh, but being able to have a fellowship with each other, I think is something that's very essential and more so now than ever because not only have we moved beyond the point of ignoring the differences and then acknowledging the differences, but also bringing the differences to the forefront of the conversation. Uh, and with that in mind, education needs to be facilitated. And uh, it's our job, I think, as especially an executive board member on the organization, to perpetuate a new standard for how we have these conversations, for how we interact with each other, and really uh, learning how to be more of one community. So that's, I say that one community on the individual Black students relating to each other and also relating to everyone else.
Now, one of the things I've come to understand is that a lot of the orchestra members at the Cleveland Orchestra are also on the faculty at the Institute of Music. And I know that I believe at least three of them are African descended people. So with the Black Student Union, do you also have a faculty advisor, or what is your relationship with the faculty and staff on campus at CIM?
Yes, we do have a staff advisor, and our staff advisor, uh, unfortunately, has will be resigning in about tomorrow. Wow. Okay, I'm sorry. I just like looked at the date. So we have found a new replacement who is serving on the president's council, and it is very helpful to have a black staff advisor who can give us more perspective on the challenges that we face as we kind of really just aim towards achieving our mission. Uh, and also just being able to get things done where we may not have the ability to kind of send that email and get it done in a week when we need it. But having someone who can provide us guidance for some of the more complex issues we face and even some of the day-to-day items. But to also kind of draw back to your question about faculty, I do in fact study with one of the three African descended Cleveland Orchestra members. Fendi Youssef has been my teacher since freshman year, and pretty much he's the reason why I'm here. So uh, just that individual connection is something that I'm extremely grateful for. But also, we've had opportunities or have created opportunities for students to play alongside these orchestra members, to learn from them. And as we get even further out of COVID land and everyone finding time and schedules, we do intend to continue developing those connections with the orchestra members.
Now, as far as those connections are concerned with between students and professional artists who are also faculty, so teaching artists, do you see yourself moving along that path to head directly to a professional orchestra, or are you more interested in teaching perhaps than performing?
Oh, great. That's a lovely question, and that's the golden question for every young musician, because historically, especially, they've been very separate fields and tracks and paths and education and really just day-to-day habits. I think in our day and age, we have far surpassed a necessary distinction between the two. Uh, of course, many people want to be performers, and I am one of those people, but I do not think that I'm willing to limit my overall impact by rooting education outside of my daily practices. So I would consider myself a teaching artist, and that's something that I decided on very early on compared to most musicians, at least at CIM, just in my conversations with friends and peers here. But that idea of a teaching artist is something that's very new, especially for classical musicians. Of course, in other art forms, they've kind of have adopted that notion much sooner. Classical music tends to be the last one to get ahead. Uh, but when I was 16, I had a really an amazingly diverse pool of mentors, and I say that the diversity in careers and what their jobs looked like as musicians. And so that idea of the teaching artist is what drew me to a professional career in music, because I knew I knew the principal clarinet of the Philly Orchestra. I had taken a lesson with him. He was fantastic. But also, I saw the careers of my own private teacher, and he didn't only play classical music. He played jazz. He played contemporary music. He played in museums. He taught in schools, and then he'd the next day fly to a different state and sub in their orchestra. And uh, of course, it's less stable than your salary paycheck at the Met. Well, not right now, but uh, I think we get that point. Uh, so yeah, I've always really been geared towards that teaching artist combination of performing and educator.
Well, thank you again, because I'm not looking at the script, but when you mentioned Sphinx, it opened a window, and I thought I would take advantage of the opportunity, just to look inside the window and see what else I could see. But you mentioned three. your teacher. There are two other um, African American. These two are African American, whose names I know, who are members of the Cleveland Orchestra, and that's Ralph Curry, who's a
Mhm.
cellist, and Alicia Nelson,
Yes.
who is a violist. And I don't know either one of them personally, but I know Alicia was the first woman. Ralph Curry was the second African American male to be full time with the Cleveland Orchestra. Um, Mr. Donald White, the late Donald White, was the very first one in 1957, not quite in my lifetime, but in my sister's lifetime. And
Mhm.
so I'm wondering, when we know, that we can count maybe on one hand, the individuals of color, or at least African descended peoples who are in the best orchestras, if you will, in the country. Do you still feel like a pioneer? Is it lonely, or are things getting better for musicians of color in that music that's in that world of music that's so dominated by Western traditions?
Yeah, that's a great question. It depends on the day, honestly. Uh, it definitely can be a very lonely experience sometimes, just because uh, not just the visual differences, but really the cultural differences. When you're in a room full of people, and already college is that sort of culture shock for most people who go. You're going to be around people from all over the world or all over the country who've had very different upbringings, views, and kind of all of these experiences thrown into their heads, and then you get in a room and present them to each other. Uh, so there's already that kind of dissonance just naturally. And then coupled with really another layer of experiences, and we can get all into those theories later. But just for transparency, I think you and I both know. uh, so when we are facing that in a community where you truly are an outlier on multiple levels, it can be quite emotionally heavy sometimes, uh, but also the moments where you know you're doing the work that will, one, inspire others, two, allow you to reach even further in your goals, uh, and three, to also just make genuine connections along the way. Uh, I think it does feel like uh, you're pushing this field forward. Uh, so, in my everyday work and practice, and that's part of the reason why I try to balance my life as a performer and an educator and more of the administrative business realm of things. Uh, it's to kind of have my stakes in pushing all of those envelopes forward because they're very different worlds, even within the bubble of music. Uh, so that's kind of my personal take on that.
Oh, well, thank you. And we've actually segued into the second portion of the interview, because the first question in this second section was describe your introduction to the arts. And you already told me about that in Philadelphia. So thank you for that information. Now, I know that your current teacher is amazing, right? And the orchestra that he performs with is amazing. But can you tell us about some of your other influential teachers and why they had such an impact on your life?
This is a really long list, and
Hey.
I will try to, I hate to leave people out, uh, but I'll go first with one of my most profoundly impactful mentors, and his name is Joseph Conyers. He is a bassist in the Philadelphia Orchestra and also the bass teacher at the Juilliard School and a bunch of other places. His resume is probably as long as the rest of the time we have here. So, extremely impressive African American man from Savannah, Georgia, and I met him my freshman year of high school. He was the conductor of my school district's youth orchestra, the All City Orchestra. Uh, and when I had got there, he had also just gotten there, having taken over from the previous conductor. Uh, and we entered the space together. and it was really weird because we were both bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and it was just he was just like a 30-year-old man, but he was new to Philadelphia from Savannah, and I was just new to high school, 15. So you can imagine, wasn't a pretty kid, but we had had conversations about music, and of course, as a great conductor, coach, mentor, he would ask about my goals and then challenge my goals and say, "Well, how are you going to do that?" And he was the first person who did that for me. Uh, Not even just in the realm of music, but really thinking beyond that scope, just really about life, because it wasn't always about how are you going to make sure you're the best musician you can possibly be, but what can you do for yourself today that will help you tomorrow? And having someone who was able to ask those questions and not let me give a short answer or even a long answer, but an answer that was tangible. Uh, and his mentorship is to this day just extremely helpful for me. And we still stay in contact and go out for dinner, things like that. Uh, but so that's one person. Also, I will say Dr. Susanna Lowy. So she was a chamber coach of mine, and also my best. She's a flute player, actually a graduate of CIM. She did her bachelor's and master's here, uh, and she was my best friend's flute teacher. And so at this point we have like various connection points, which is pretty funny. Uh, but when I had just started, she was the first teaching artist I'd ever met. Uh, she didn't have her full-time teaching job, nor did she have her full-time orchestra job. She was an entrepreneur. She had created her own ensembles. She had created her own summer festival, and she just set up her own world in her career. And I was just amazed by that. You know, we of course we're used to kind of business people doing that kind of thing, uh, but to see that happen with just her training as a flute player and then pulling from various skill sets in other disciplines and tying it all together, that amazed me, and it still does really. Uh, definitely, she's someone, Dr. Lowy, who I really still admire. And uh, lastly, I'd say my high school band and orchestra directors. So that's Mr. Brian Ewing and Miss Nanette Foley. Uh, they were, like I had mentioned before, at Kappa High School. Uh, that was kind of where I really started to focus on a career in music. Uh, they were always extremely helpful with making sure I was doing well as a person. And that's an important part about having a career in music, uh, because it's so easy to lose track of what is important. Like, we got on this call first thing, and I was a few minutes late because I was picking up my groceries. Uh, so things like that, I would beat myself up over, and even now I got to be easier on myself. But just remembering to be a person and that you are allowed to have fun and live and make mistakes and still be able to breathe easy afterwards. Those two were extremely helpful with helping me stay grounded, and just all of the really everything else that's important in life. Uh, so that combination of people, I think, were all very helpful for me growing up.
Well, thank you. And I know you're still very young compared to me, but I think you're very young. But I know that you're a man also. And I have listened to you talk about the conference in Detroit and the difference that it made, the birth at Temple University Hospital, and the difference that the city made, and the educators and your mother, first and foremost, made in your life in Philadelphia. And then I heard you say Juilliard. And I know that's not in Philadelphia, but the question that I want to ask now is, what role has travel played in your life and in your career to this point? Major, minor, local, regional, national, international. Has travel made a difference for you?
Yeah. Well, I'll start off by saying international travel is out of my budget right now. So, and has been for a little bit. I've gone on a cruise to Mexico, but other than that, international travel has pretty much been uh, postponed for later. Uh, but I have had more local travel experiences that have been uh, there's great experiences. One being my experience at the Kinhaven Music School. Uh, and still on the East Coast. It's in Western Vermont, so it's in Southern Vermont, in a very small town. By definition, it's a village. Uh, and I spent 3 summers, 6 weeks at a time there. And so that was 2017, 18, and 2019. So while I was in high school, and it was a chamber music focused program. We also played in orchestra, sang in choir, and other summer camp activities. uh, and I went there for, like I said, 3 summers, and each time was just a new experience for self discovery, either in my career focus or in my personal goals in life, uh, and other hormonal teenager things. So there it was. And I think that that kind of experience, being able to go to a controlled environment away from home and also away from the standards that were set on me as a student, as really even a black person, just because a black person in Philadelphia looks very different from a black person anywhere else, because Philadelphia culture is always something that's detached from the mainstream culture at large. So being able to get uh, those varying perspectives, and also being around people who are also from all over uh, at that young age, and being able to learn from them, talk with them, play music with them, share goals, and learn from others about the different options that exist in the professional world. That was really helpful for me. And that's kind of where I found my passion for chamber music specifically. Uh, and within my goals of being a performer, that's really where I would like my career to be centered as a chamber musician.
Okay, well, thank you. And I heard you say that the last year of the 6 week term, the 6 week summer that you spent in Vermont, and at that very special campsite, was in 2019. And so, can you just tell me how much of your college education to date has taken place during the season of COVID-19?
Yeah, so I'm a junior right now, and COVID started in the spring of 2020 when I was a freshman. So we were literally on spring break. We were halfway through the spring semester of my freshman year, and I was still in Cleveland, actually. And in a matter of days, life went from, oh, some people are getting sick in China, to, okay, so the world's shutting down tomorrow and I need to go back home. And that's that lasts for a year, maybe. Yeah, I guess it's still going. That seems to be I think it's very, we're all very aware that it's still going, but this is America. So uh, pretty much most of it. Uh, but it seems like this is, I don't know. It's very strange, because to me, I'm 20 years old. In my mind, like, this could have been this could be something that happens every 20 years. Obviously not, hopefully not, but with my perspective, of course the world kind of got uprooted for a second. Uh, but I'm used to things not going as planned, and this is just kind of, my entry point in this, and my reference point in how things should go and what experiences should be like. This is it. So I've been finding ways to really take the best out of all of the experiences I've had, regardless of the impact of COVID, while still being safe and cautious and educated on all of those things.
Mhm. So, how was the pivot to virtual lessons? Or did you find another teacher back home in Philadelphia? How did that go?
Yeah. Also, I still took lessons with my teacher, with Effendi, and honestly, that was the easiest thing. Everything else was difficult. It was lessons are, this is my passion. This is my education. This is my degree. You know, this is like the one thing that I have worked towards to make a decision on how I want it to go. Uh, so when lessons transitioned, of course, it wasn't the most ideal, but it's like, all right, clarinet time. That's the easy part. I just have to practice. But uh, more of the transition of spending a year as an independent college student and then going back to live with my mother for maybe, and at that time, maybe it's a month, maybe it's 2 months, and then a year went by. uh, so things like that. Your room gets turned into a storage closet, and now I'm like, I need a bed. So, uh, the things like that was the transition, and also in the wake of all of the other social issues that kind of came to the surface while we had the time to actually think, uh, and that was a transition that was much more internal uh, for me.
Even in the midst of this ongoing pandemic, and the New York Times had the audacity to say, I think we can call that audacity, that we're dealing with a dual pandemic. One is the coronavirus, COVID-19, and the other is this pandemic of police violence, especially in urban America in Black communities. Would you agree that they're right, that there are two pandemics that we're dealing with simultaneously?
I will say so. Yes.
Is that true of Philly and Cleveland, or is this a national issue from your vantage point?
Uh, it really is a national issue. Of course, I can speak from my perspective as someone who's experienced life in Cleveland and Philadelphia and say uh, it's very present in those places. Especially, look, I grew up in Philadelphia. I traveled every day to a school that was 7 miles away from my home. I took public transportation, and you see it. I lived in, like, I don't really come from wealth or privilege or anything like that. So I live in a very urban community. Some may call it the hood, So that's that's my life. I think it became evident that that is a part of life in American culture that many people aren't aware of, and that was reconciling with that with my peers was very, very interesting. Even if we didn't have conversations about it or they have not acknowledged it, it's very clear just through speaking on your own experiences and listening to other people's that that perspective is missed.
Now, I want to ask you about your online presence. Um, I had a chance to watch and listen to a couple of YouTube videos where
Oh
you
no.
featured. One in particular at the base of the Thinker at the Cleveland Museum of Art, right in front of that thing. I don't know if you know the one that I'm referring to, but very moving presentation, not instrumental, but vocal and more lyrical poetry. Can we call it that? But how would you describe that presentation? If you know the one that I'm talking about, right there in front of the Thinker at the Cleveland Museum of Art.
Yeah, so what you're referring to, I did a small impromptu project almost called Here's to the Rock, an homage to Jay-Z. And that was, I guess, lyrical poetry. I don't really think of it that way because I just don't think of it that much. It's one of those things where I don't really sit down and say, I'm going to do something. It just kind of starts happening. And as I've gotten older, just really one of the things I've had to learn to do, especially while going to a school like CIM, is to detach a little bit from my music making, and specifically the studies and the performance, because right now everything in that area is under a microscope. I'm picking it apart. It is not, the point is not to sound good every time I pick up my instrument. It's to explore, it's to learn, it's to improve. And if I sound good when I'm practicing, I'm probably not playing the things I need to practice. Uh, just at this point in my career. But also, still there exists that uh, urge to be creative. And so something I had started doing in the process of trying to let the clarinet be its own beast and then separate my artistry a little bit so I can still be happy with the things that I create. And that piece was one that came out of that shift. And I I wrote it because I was listening to a lot of music. I wasn't talking to many people. We were on campus that semester, still during the quarantine. So I was here in Cleveland that fall, and uh, I was listening to a lot of music, a lot of Brahms, a lot of Bach, a lot of hip hop, so things were just kind of floating through my head. And also, I was just pretty frustrated with the world. Yeah, I think a lot of us found ourselves in a place where it's, we can't control anything, and then even the things that kept us kind of feeling in control were just those structures were just kind of put on hold for a little bit. Uh, and I was upset with the structures. I didn't get them. Or maybe I got them, and realized that those structures weren't there for me. Uh, and so I had to create my own way. And instead of taking that out on others, or doing literally anything else, I used my creative voice, which is the one that I'm most comfortable with. Uh, and that piece was a result.
So that piece is about a year old. That's fall of 2020.
Just about.
Okay. All right. Um, Now, I wouldn't say that I detected rage, but I did hear emotion in that presentation. But would you call it anger? Would you call it honesty? Do we need to label it, or should we just accept it as art?
And I think that's exactly the beauty of art, because it surpasses one emotion. Uh, I think art is really a reflection of the human experience. And humans do experience emotion, but we also experience so much more. And, the words that we have to describe them are just kind of, that's just things that we throw at it to pinpoint and understand each other. We all feel similarly, but we don't all feel exactly the same. Uh, and I think through art is where we find a way to connect with each other without even using those words, because they're irrelevant. It's about what you feel in any way you can describe that, not to understand the feeling, but to make that person feel. Uh, I think is what we aim for.
Thank you. Again, a little off the script, but I have one that is definitely part of the script. You mentioned earlier that you're in a leadership position with a Black student union, but I'm wondering whether there are opportunities for you to mentor and teach just by being you. And what I mean by that is, you said you don't come from privilege. Where you grew up in Philadelphia, some people would call, you did the quotes in the air, so I'm going to echo you and say the hood. And University Circle is in the heart of the city of Cleveland, and just a few blocks over is the hood.
Hmm.
But do you have the opportunity to go into the surrounding community and maybe interact with young Black men, especially Cleveland School of the Arts or other campuses that might be thinking along the same lines as you? And or is it primarily with the students on the campus of CIM that you interact?
Yeah, you did mention Cleveland School of the Arts. I am a teacher there. Well, I've been teaching there virtually, but starting next week, I'll be going in 4 days a week to work with all of their clarinet and saxophone students. So freshmen, sophomores, seniors, juniors are in there too. Uh, so I do work with the CSA students, and where I live on Ashbury, kind of it's if you can imagine University Circle being in the circle, we are still in a city, and after Ashbury, things become less circly and more traditional city blocks, and that's kind of the divide between East Cleveland and University Circle. Uh, so I can see into the community. I've always been aware. I went on a run kind of around the area last week, uh, and really there is a big difference. There's a very noticeable difference, and there are very tangible reasons why that difference exists. But uh, I have not had a chance to go into that community, especially on the connecting on the basis outside of studying music. Uh, that's something that I would really be interested in doing moving forward, especially, I still have 2 more years at least in Cleveland. Uh, and connecting with the community in that way is something that I really think is important to do.
Well, congratulations on your position with the Cleveland School of the Arts. It sounds like you're that teaching artist already, at least as far as those
Uh,
students are
uh,
concerned. Is that fair?
yes, I think that's community program teaching artist. I think that's the name of the position. I forget everything's on paper. And,
Well,
and
congratulations. It
thank you.
sounds pretty serious, 4 days a week.
It's
It's a
at
job.
8:45 in the morning. Yes, I it really hit me yesterday. I was like, wait, my first class is at 2.
Okay. Early riser. Maybe that's what, no, we'll reject the labels. No, I won't call you an early riser.
I
So,
am a morning person. I really am. I think that's why I enjoy the mornings off, so I can just be with me and collect myself. But, high schoolers are great.
but I heard a CIM alumna who was a pianist
Mhm.
talk about her life as a musician. And I think she was practicing 8 hours a day,
Oh,
which
yes.
is the equivalent of a full-time job. Is
Mhm.
that your life? Is that how your mornings are spent when you're not in the classroom teaching others? That it's 8 hours a day of practicing?
I will confess, clarinet players do not have to practice as much as pianists. we- it's the piano is a very different instrument, and people start that instrument when they're 2. People start the clarinet when they're like 10 to 14. So there's a bit of a difference, but still I do spend a substantial amount of hours in the practice room studying scores outside, but knowing my own self and how I learn best, it's not just the amount of time I spend physically on the instrument, but the time I spend away from the instrument developing interpretations and also mental practice, which is a very important component of that. I think for very long, musicians have we've had that full time job approach to practice that kind of has you beating your head against a wall a little bit. Uh, I think 8 hours is too long to do any one thing really for that amount of time when most people here don't even sleep for that long. Uh, but for about 3.5 to 4.5 hours a day, I'm in clarinet music mode, uh, and that's the balance that works for me, or at least has thus far.
Okay. Well, thank you. I want to ask also, and this is one of the questions in the closing section of the list today. What are your thoughts in this moment about public funding for the arts, especially when there's so many other competing interests at this time, including healthcare, the environment, the political unrest, the dual pandemics that we talked about earlier, and now with Afghanistan in the news so much, crises at home and abroad. And maybe they were always there, but not necessarily front and center. But public funding for the arts, if people ask you, for example, why we should support the arts with public funding, do you have an answer for them?
I sure hope so. Like that's my job. But much, much more than that. Uh, I think the arts and really the arts and culture sector is it's obvious something that we have acknowledged that needs support, it needs uplifting because it has value, it's there. So uh, I think we often enter this conversation uh, I know when you work in the sector it's like you get let down so often, more often than not, by the government and the lack of public funding that we have. Uh, but I think by just simply acknowledging that there is a reason why we are here, and let's start there. Like? Why is this even taking up X amount of thousands of dollars, billions nationwide, uh, in our budget? And I think we don't question that notion enough because of course we've decided that it's there, but we at this point have gone on autopilot and saying, well, this is just what we have left. And you mentioned the dual pandemics and also the education system, which is could maybe even another pandemic or an epidemic. Yeah. But all of these really pressing issues that we face as a society, I think the arts is not just a way to educate people on what just the purpose, but what it could be in their lives, not as an alternative to everything else, but as a way to give their lives purpose. You know, it doesn't mean everyone has to go into the art studio and then find their way to CIA when they're done high school, or it doesn't mean that you have to go to the music settlement and then find your passion and end up in the Cleveland Orchestra. But it can mean maybe giving you the chance to reflect. I think, especially now, we have so many things in our lives that think for us, and we have so many structures. You know, partially it's a brilliant thing that you don't have to worry about where to send your child to school if you live in this city. There is a place for them, there's a seat for them, and they will have lunch and they will have the ability to learn how to read and write and all of these things. uh, but also it allows us to continue about our days following some a script that we can't see but are living. And I think the arts and really the practice of it and developing yourself in that way can help you detach and find a greater sense of purpose in the world and examine your position, not as an artist in that moment, but as a person interacting with that experience. And I mentioned before, it's more than the exact emotion you're feeling in that moment, but it's that combination of the room you're in and the people you're with and your mind at that time, and then zoom out and then zoom back in. Acknowledge that. And the arts gives us the opportunity to disconnect and reconnect and then bring it back together, more so, I think, than anything else in the world.
Well, I thank you so much for your candor, your honesty. That's how I'm experiencing it. I think you're telling the truth about how you honestly feel about the place of the arts in our lives. And I've come to the end of my list of questions, but I always like to end with this. Is there anything else that you would like to say about the arts, the role of arts and culture in your life?
I I often say that just knowing everything about myself and the way I am and my habits and tendencies and good and bad and ugly, that God knew what he was doing when he put me here. Like it was this was not an accident. And I truly believe that everything I have experienced and will experience, uh, that it is what it is and what it's going to be. Uh, and I have confidence that that has a purpose. I think that the role uh, of arts and culture in my life is here. I'm living in this world because that was the world I was meant to live in. Uh, so I don't know. That's I really have no doubt that everything that I'm doing right now and everything that the environment is working with me to do uh, is going to lead to something that is going to push us forward as people, with my family in mind from the generational perspective, and my friends, uplifting them, and my students and my own mentors. Uh, I think we're all working together to, you know, keep the world spinning more than just a ball on the earth, but a profound and impactful experience that is worthwhile.
Well, I want to say thank you again for saying yes to the A. Gracely Mims Arts and Culture Oral History Project, um, named in honor of my former teacher and my mentor, Dr. A. Grace Lee Mims, who made her transition in October of 2019, but not before she had spent about 20 years on the board, I believe,
Mhm.
a long time. I saw the minutes from a lot of those meetings that she attended. We have her collection at the Western Reserve Historical Society, but she was a great soprano, longtime faculty member at the music school settlement, and now they just call it TMS, right?
You
The
know,
music
everyone's
settlement.
transitioning to acronyms now.
Yeah, yeah. But I know she she enjoyed her years at the Cleveland Institute of Music and working with her colleagues on the board there. So, and I know, that she made a world of difference here in Northeast Ohio through her Black Arts Radio program and other work that she did with WCLV, home of the Cleveland Orchestra, as far as the radio stations are concerned. But yeah, I thank you for what you're doing in your time, not necessarily living in her shadow, but seems like you found your own path. And that's a beautiful thing. So, congratulations again on everything that you've achieved. We'll continue to expect great things from you. We will transcribe your interview and get the transcript and the video to you before we add it to the permanent collection of the research library at the Western Reserve Historical Society. It takes a bit of doing to get all that done. I expect to get this to you before the holiday break. So that better be by December 15th, right? Before you go back home to Philadelphia for
Literally
holiday.
on the 16th. So
Pardon?
I'm out on the 16th, so that works
Of
perfect.
December?
Hmm.
Oh, okay. But I know there'll be a party somewhere. So we'll try to get it to you before the 16th. But thank you so very much. And please give my regards to Ms. Jania
Of course.
Stigall, who told me about you and the wonderful programming that they have at the Cleveland Institute of Music and the positive difference that it's making in the lives of students of color. So you take care and be well. Don't practice too hard, but have a wonderful day. We'll be in touch.
Great, thank you.